Hello, darlings. Welcome to the Gentleman Psychic. You know my routine because I'm not using Restream, and I should be, but I am going to go on here and share. So one moment, my darlings, while I do this. Thank you for joining me for a special reading tonight. Let's pause that one, and then we share this copy. And we go over here to the Book of Faces, as I like to say. Here we go. And I will post it here. Paste. And we will go here and paste. Join me live right now for the finale of We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Let me post that one. And then I have one more. Hi, Mary Jane. Good to see you. You are the first one in that I can see, the first conversation, that is. So it is good to have you. One more time, I have to share on my other Facebook page. Share to a page. Join me now. And post that. Hi, Amy. Good to have you. Good evening. Gigi, hello. Thank you so much, Gigi. That is quite a compliment. I am truly honored. We left off last night's reading, and I'm sorry it was so long. I just started reading when the clock struck, and I thought, well, it shouldn't be that long of a chapter, and it was a very long chapter. But we left off with the house had caught fire and they had put it out, and then they decided that they were going to ransack the house, and Uncle Julian is dead. So that is where we left off, and that, my darlings, is where we're going to pick up. I'm going to give just another moment. I'm going to allow the clock to go so that I don't disturb my reading, and also gives everyone a nice chance to go ahead and get a nice glass of water, or maybe perhaps you like something a little bit stronger. So I have Cody here. Hello, Cody. Stephen Sigmund. Hello. Good evening. I really am so excited to bring this book to you, the finale. I actually had not seen the film, and it was well done. The film version was well done, but I have to admit, I enjoy the book so much more because there are things in a book that you can go into detail that you cannot quite do via film. And one of the things that I missed the most was the internal dialogue of our hero, Mary Catherine Blackwood. So Gigi says, "I'm excited to watch you. Thanks for the opportunity to give us enlightenment. My pleasure." What's going on with the voice? I don't know. Does my voice sound strange? Anybody else? Does my voice sound strange? Maybe I can bring this a little bit closer so that I'm not so far. So excited and just settled for the evening. This is awesome. Richard Lale, so gracious to read to us. I am so honored. Here is our clock, and it is just going to go off and strike the hour. Gives everyone time to settle. Do I have a cold? Oh, no, I don't have a cold. I mean, I don't think I have a cold. Um, I don't know what is with my voice then. I don't know. But anyway, I am glad to have each and every one of you. So I am looking forward to the finale. Chapter 10. Slowly the pattern of our days grew and shaped itself into a happy life. In the mornings, when I awakened, I would go at once down the hall to make sure the front door was locked. We were most active in the very early morning because no one was ever around. We had not realized that, with the gates open, the path exposed to the public use, the children would come. One morning I stood beside the front door, looking out through the narrow pane of glass, and saw children playing on our front lawn. Perhaps the parents had sent them to explore the way and make sure that it was navigable. Or perhaps the children can never resist playing anywhere. They seemed a little uneasy playing in front of our house, and their voices were subdued. I thought that perhaps they were only pretending to play because they were children and were supposed to play, but perhaps they were actually sent here to look for us, thinly disguised as children. They were not really convincing. I decided as I watched them. They moved gracelessly and never once glanced, that I could see, at our house. I wondered how soon they would creep onto the porch and press their small faces against the shutters, trying to see through the cracks. Constance came up behind me and looked out over my shoulder. They are the children of strangers, I told her. They have no faces. They have eyes. Pretend they are birds. They can't see us. They don't know it yet. They don't want to believe it, but they won't ever see us again. I suppose that now they've come once, they'll only come the once. And the strangers will come, but they can't see inside. And now may I please have my breakfast? The kitchen was always dark in the mornings until I unbolted the kitchen door and opened it to let the sunlight in. Then Jonas went to sit on the step and bathe, and Constance sang while she made our breakfast. After breakfast, I sat on the step with Jonas while Constance washed the kitchen. Barricading the sides of the house had been easier than I expected. I managed it one night, with Constance holding a flashlight for me. At either side of our house, there was a spot where the trees and bushes grew close to the house, sheltering the back and narrowing the path, which was the only way around. I brought a piece of I brought piece after piece from the pile of junk Mr. Harler had made on our front porch, and heaped the broken boards and furniture across the narrowest spot. It would not really keep anyone out, of course. The children could climb over it easily, but if anyone did try to get past, there would be enough noise and falling of broken boards to give us plenty of time to close and bolt the kitchen door. I had found some boards around the tool shed and nailed them crudely across the glass of the kitchen door, but I disliked putting them across the sides of the house as a barricade, where anyone might see them and know how clumsily I built. Perhaps, I told myself, I might try my hand at mending the broken step. Why are you laughing? What are you laughing about now? Constance asked me. I am thinking we are on the moon, but it is not quite as I supposed it would be. It is a very happy place, though. Constance was bringing breakfast to the table, scrambled eggs and toast, biscuits and blackberry jam. She had made some golden summer. We we ought to bring some I'm sorry, we ought to bring in much food as we can, she said. I don't like to think of the garden waiting there for us to come and gather growing things, and I'd feel much better if we had more food put securely away in the house. I will go on my winged horse and bring you cinnamon and thyme, emeralds and clove, cloth of gold and cabbages and rhubarb. We were able to leave the kitchen door open when we went down to the vegetable garden because we could see clearly whether anyone was approaching my barricades and run back to the house if we needed to. I carried the basket, and we brought back lettuce, still gray with ash, and radishes and tomatoes and cucumbers, and later berries and melons. Usually I ate fruit and vegetables, still moist from the ground and the air, but I disliked eating anything while it was still dirty, with the ash from our burned house. Most of the dirt and the soot had blown away, and the air around the garden was fresh and clean, but the smoke was in the ground, and I thought it would always be there. As soon as we were safely settled, Constance had opened Uncle Julian's room and cleaned it. She brought out the sheets from Uncle Julian's bed and the blankets and washed them in the kitchen sink and set them outside to dry in the sunlight. What are you going to do with Uncle Julian's papers? I asked her, and she rested her hands against the edge of the sink, hesitating. I I suppose I'll keep them all in the box, she said. I suppose I'll put the box down in the cellar. And preserve it? Yes, and preserve it. He would like to think that his papers were treated respectfully, and I would not want Uncle Julian to suspect that his papers were not preserved. I'd better go down and see the front door if the front door is locked. The children were often outside of our house on the lawn, playing their still games and not looking at our house, moving awkwardly in little dashing runs and slapping one another without cause. Whenever I checked to make sure that the front door was locked, I looked out to see if children were there. Very often, I saw people walking on our path now, using it to go from one place to another and putting their feet down where once only my feet had gone. I thought they used the path without wanting to, as though each of them had to travel at once to show that it could be done. But I thought that only a few of the defiant, hating ones came by more than once. I dreamed away the long afternoon, and while Constance cleaned Uncle Julian's room, I sat on the doorstep with Jonas asleep beside me and looked out on the quiet, still garden. Look, Merricat, Constance said, coming to me, an armful of clothes. Look, Uncle Julian had 2 suits and a topcoat and a hat. He walked upright once. He told us so himself. I can just barely remember him years ago going off one day to buy a suit, and I suppose it was one of these suits he bought. They are neither of them much worn. What would he have been wearing on the last day with them? What tie did he have on at dinner? He would surely like to have it remembered. She looked at me for a minute, not smiling. It would hardly have been one of these. When I came to get him afterwards, it was at the hospital. He was wearing pajamas and a robe. Perhaps he should have one of these suits now. He was probably buried in an old suit of Jim Clark's. Constance started for the cellar and then stopped. Merricat. Yes, Constance. Do you realize that these things of Uncle Julian's are the only clothes left in our house? All of mine are burned, and all of yours, and everything of theirs in the attic. I have only this pink dress I have on. I look down, and I am wearing brown, and yours need washing and mending. How can you tear your clothes so, my merry cat? I shall weave a suit of leaves at once with acorns for buttons. Merry cat, please be serious. We will have to wear Uncle Julian's clothes. No, I am not allowed to touch Uncle Julian's things. I shall have a lining of moss for cold winter days and a hat made of a bird feathers. That may be very well for the moon, Miss Foolishness. On the moon you may wear a suit of fur like Jonas, for all of me. But right now, in our house, you are going to be clothed in one of your Uncle Julian's old shirts, and perhaps his trousers too. Or Uncle Julian's bathrobe and pajamas, I suppose. No, I am not allowed to touch Uncle Julian's things. I will wear the leaves. But you are allowed. I tell you that you are allowed. No, I'm not, she sighed. Well, she said, you'll probably see me wearing them. Then she stopped and laughed and looked at me once again. Constance, I said. She put Uncle Julian's clothes over the back of the chair and, still laughing, went into the pantry and opened one of the drawers. I remembered when she was after, I laughed too. Then she came back and put an armload of tablecloths down beside me. These will do very nicely, elegant Merricat. Look how you feel in this, with a border of yellow flowers, or this handsome red and white check. The damask, I'm afraid, is too stiff for comfort, and besides, it has to be darned. I stood up and held the red and white checkered tablecloth against me. You can cut a hole for my head, I said. I was pleased. I have no sewing things. You will simply have to tie it around your waist with a cord or let it hang like a toga. I will use the damask for a cloak. Who else wears a damask cloak? Merricat, oh my Merricat. Constance dropped the tablecloth she was holding and put her arms around me. What have I done to my baby, Merricat? She said. No house, no food, dressed in a tablecloth. What have I done? Constance, I said. I love you, Constance. Constance, we are going to be very happy, Constance. Oh, my Merricat, she said, holding me. Listen to me, Constance. We are going to be very happy. I dressed at once, not wanting to give Constance more time to think. I chose the red, white check, and when Constance had cut a hole for my head, I took my gold cord with a tassel that Constance had cut from the drawing room drapes and tied it around me for a belt, and looked, I thought, very fine. Constance was sad at first, and turned away sadly when she saw me, and scrubbed furiously at the sink to get my brown dress clean. But I liked my robe, and danced in it, and before long she smiled again, and then laughed at me. Robinson Crusoe dressed in the skins of animals, I told her. He had no gay clothes with the gold belt. I must say you never looked so bright before. You will be wearing the skins of Uncle Julian. I prefer my tablecloth. I believe the one you are wearing now was used for summer breakfast on the lawn many years ago. Red and white check would never be used in the dining room, of course. Some days I shall be a summer breakfast on the lawn, and some days I shall be a formal dinner by candlelight, and some days I shall be a very dirty Merricat. You have a fine gown, but your face is dirty. We have lost almost everything, young lady, but at least we still have clean water and a comb. One thing was most lucky about Uncle Julian's room. I persuaded Constance to bring out his chair and wheel it through the garden to reinforce my barricade. It looked strange to see Constance wheeling the empty chair, and for a minute I tried to see Uncle Julian again, writing with his hands in his lap, but all that remained of Uncle Julian's presence were the worn spots on the chair and a handkerchief tucked under the cushion. The chair would be powerful in my barricade. However, staring out always at intruders with a blank menace of dead Uncle Julian. I was troubled to think that Uncle Julian might vanish altogether, with his papers in a box in the chair on the barricade, and his toothbrush thrown away, and even the smell of Uncle Julian gone from his room. But when the ground was soft, Constance planted a yellow rose bush at Uncle Julian's spot on the lawn, and one night I went down to check the buried Uncle Julian's initialed gold pencil by the water, so the creek would always speak his name. Jonas took to going into Uncle Julian's room, where he had never gone before, but I did not go inside. Helen Clark came out to our door once or twice more, knocking and calling and begging us to answer. But we sat quietly, and when she found that she could not come round the house because of the barricade, she told us from the front door that she would not come back. And she did not. One evening, perhaps the evening of the day Constance planted Uncle Julian's rosebush, we heard a very soft knock at our front door while we set the table eating dinner. It was far too soft a knock for Helen Clark, and I left the table and hurried silently down the hall to be sure that the front door was locked, and Constance followed me, curious. We pressed silently against the door and listened. "Miss Blackwood," someone said outside in a low voice. I wondered if he suspected we were so close to him. "Miss Constance? Miss Mary Catherine?" It was not quite dark outside, but inside where we stood we could only see another dimly, two white faces against the door. "Miss Constance," he said again, "listen." I thought that he was moving his head from side to side to make sure that he was not seen. "Listen," he said. I got a chicken here." He tapped softly on the door. "I hope you can hear me," he said. I got a chicken here. My wife fixed it, roasted it nice, and there's some cookies and a pie. I hope you can hear me." I could see that Constance's eyes were wide with wonder. I stared at her, and she stared at me. "I sure hope you can hear me, Miss Blackwood. Hey, listen, I broke one of your chairs, and I'm dreadfully sorry." He tapped against the door, again very softly. "Well," he said, I'll just set the basket down here on your step. I hope you heard me. Goodbye." We listened to quiet footsteps going away, and after a minute, Constance said, "What shall we do? Shall we open the door?" "Later," I said. "I'll come when it's really dark." I wonder what kind of pie it is. Do you think it's as good as my pies? We finished our dinner and waited until I was sure that no one could possibly see the front door opening. And then we went down the hall, and I unlocked the door and looked outside. The basket sat on the doorstep, covered with a napkin. I brought it inside and locked the door while Constance took the basket from me and carried it to the kitchen. Blueberry, she said when I came. Quite good, too. It's still warm. She took out the chicken, wrapped in a napkin, and the little package of cookies, touching each lovingly with gentleness. Everything's still warm, she said. She must have baked them right after dinner, so we could bring them right over. I wonder if she made two pies, one for the house. She wrapped everything while it was still warm and told him to bring them over. The cookies are not crisp enough. I'll take the basket back and leave it on the front porch so he'll know we found it. No, no, Constance caught me by the arm. Not until I've washed the napkins. What would she think of me? Sometimes they brought bacon, home cured, or fruit of their own preserves, which were never as good as the preserves Constance made. Mostly they brought roasted chicken, sometimes a cake or a pie, frequently cookies, sometimes a potato salad or a coleslaw. Once they brought a pot of beef stew, with Constance took the part and put back together again according to her own rules for beef stew. And sometimes there were pots of baked beans or macaroni. We were the biggest church supper they ever had, Constance said, looking at a loaf of handmade bread I had just brought inside. These things were always left on the front doorstep, always silently, and in the evenings. We thought that the men came home from work and the women had the baskets ready for them to carry out. Perhaps they came in the darkness not to be recognized, as though each of them wanted to hide from the others, and bringing us food was somehow a shameful thing to do in public. There were many women cooking, Constance said. Here's one, she explained to me once, tasting a bean. Who uses ketchup? And too much of it. And the last one used more molasses. Once or twice there was a note in the basket. This is for the dishes, or we apologize about the curtains, or sorry about your harp. We always set the baskets back here where we found them, and never opened the front door until it was completely dark, and we were sure that no one was near. I always checked carefully afterwards to make certain that the front door was locked. I discovered that I was no longer allowed to go to the creek. Uncle Julian was there, and it was much too far for Constance. I never went further away than the edge of the woods, and Constance went only as far as the vegetable garden. I was not allowed to bury anything any more, nor was I allowed to touch stone. Every day I looked over the boards across the kitchen windows, and when I found small cracks, I nailed on more boards. Every morning I checked at once to make sure the front door was locked, and every morning Constance washed the kitchen. We spent a good deal of time at the front door, particularly during the afternoons, when most people came by. We sat, one on either side of the front door, looking out through the narrow glass panels which I covered almost entirely with cardboard, so that we had each only a small peephole, and no one could possibly see inside. We watched the children playing and the people walking past, and we heard their voices, and they were all strangers, with their wide staring eyes and their evil open mouths. One day a group came by bicycle. There were two women and a man and two children. They parked their bicycles in our driveway and lay down on our front lawn, pulling at the grass and talking while they rested. The children ran up and down our driveway and over and around the trees and bushes. This was the day we learned the vines were growing over the burned roof of our house, because one woman glanced sideways at the house and said that the vines almost hid the marks of the burning. They rarely turned squarely to look at our house face to face, but looked from the corners of their eyes, or from over a shoulder, or through their fingers. It used to be a lovely old house, I hear, said the woman sitting on our grass. I've heard that it was quite a local landmark at one time. Now it looks like a tomb, the other woman said. Shh, the first woman said, and gestured toward the house with her head. I heard, she said loudly, that they had a staircase which was very fine, carved in Italy, I heard. They can't hear you, the other woman said, amused. And who cares if they do anyway? Shh! No one knows for sure if there's anyone inside or not. The local people tell some tall tales. Shh, Tommy, she called to one of the children. Don't you go near those steps. Why? said the child, backing away. Because the ladies live in there and they don't like it. Why? Said the child, pausing at the front of the steps and giving a quick look backward at our front door. The ladies don't like little boys, the second woman said. She was one of the bad ones. I could see her mouth from the side, and it was the mouth of a snake. What would they do to me? They'd hold you down and make you eat candy full of poison. I heard that dozens of bad little boys have gone too near that house and never been seen again. They catch little boys and they... Shh! Honestly, Ethel. Do they like little girls? The other children drew near. They hate little boys and little girls. The difference is they eat the little girls. Ethel, stop it. You're terrifying the children. Now, that's not true, darlings. She's only teasing you. They never come out except at night, the bad woman said, looking evilly at the children. And then when it's dark, they go hunting little children. Just the same, the man said suddenly, I don't want to see the kids going too near that house. Charles Blackwood came back only once. He came in a car with another man late one afternoon, and we had been watching for a long time. All the strangers had gone, and Constance had just stirred and said, Time to put on the potatoes, when the car turned into the driveway and settled back to watch again. Charles and the other man got out of the car in front of the house and walked directly to the front of the steps, looking up, although they could not see us inside. I remembered the first time Charles had come and stood looking up at our house in just the same manner. About this time, he would never get in, but this time he would never get in. I reached up and touched the lock of the front door just to make sure that it was fastened, and on the other side of the doorway, Constance turned and nodded to me. She knew, too, that Charles would never set in again. Now, see, Charles said outside at the front of our steps. There's the house, just like I said. It doesn't look as bad as it did. Now the vines have grown so, but the roof's been burned away, and the place was gutted inside. Are the ladies in there? Yeah, sure, Charles laughed, and I remembered his laughter and his big, staring white face, and from inside the door I wished him dead. They're all in there, all right, he said, and so is a whole damn fortune. You know that? Oh, they've got money. In there, they've got more money in there that's ever been counted. They've got it all buried all over the place and safe and full, and God knows where they've hidden it. They never come out, just hide away inside with all of that money. Look, the other man said, they know you, don't they? Sure, I'm their cousin. I came here to visit once. You think there's any chance you might get one of them to talk to you? Maybe come to the window or something, so I could get a picture, Charles thought. He looked at the house and at the other man and thought, if you sell this to a magazine or somewhere, do I get half? Yeah, sure, I promise. All right, I'll try it, Charles said. You get back behind the car out of sight. They certainly won't come if they see a stranger. The other man went back to the car and took out a camera and settled himself on the other side of the car where we could not see him. Okay, he called, and Charles started up the steps of our front door. Hey, Connie, he called. Connie, it's Charles. I'm back. I looked at Constance and thought she had never seen Charles so truly before. Connie. She knew now that Charles was a ghost and a demon, one of the strangers. Now let's forget all that happened, Charles said. He came close to the door and spoke pleasantly, with a little pleading tone. Come on, Connie, let's be friends again. I could see his feet. One of them was tapping on the floor of our porch. I don't know what you've got against me, he said, and I've been waiting and waiting for you to let me know I could come back again. If I did anything to offend you, I'm really sorry, Connie. I wish Charles could see inside, could see us sitting on the floor on either side of the front door, listening to him and looking at his feet while he talked beggingly to the door 3 feet above our heads. Open the door! I broke my cufflink. Open the door! he said. Connie, will you open the door for Cousin Charles? Constance looked up where his face must have smiled unpleasantly. I thought it must be a smile that she had been saving for Charles if ever he came back again. I went to see Uncle Julian's grave this morning, Charles said. I came back to visit old Uncle Julian's grave and to see you once more. He waited a minute. He waited a minute and then said with a little break in his voice, I put a couple of flowers, on the old fellow's grave. He was one fine old guy. He was always pretty good to me. Beyond Charles' feet, I saw the man coming out from behind the car with his camera. Now look here, he called. You're wasting your breath, and I haven't got all day. Don't you understand? Charles had turned away from the door, but his voice had a little break in it. I've got to get in to see her once more. I was the cause of it all. Of what? Why do you suppose that two old maids shut themselves up in a house like this? God knows, Charles said. I didn't mean to turn out this way. I thought Constance was going to speak then, or at least laugh out loud, and I reached across and touched her arm, warning her to be quiet, but she did not turn her head to me. If I could just talk to her, Charles said. You can get some pictures of the house anyway, with me standing here or knocking on the door or something. I could be knocking frantically at the door. You could be stretched across the door sill, dying of a broken heart for all of me, the other man said. He went to the car and put his camera inside. Waste of time. And all that money, Connie, Charles called loudly. Will you, for heaven's sake, open the door? You know, the other man said from the car, I'll just bet you're never going to see those silver dollars again. Connie, Charles said, you don't know what you're doing to me. I never deserved to be treated like this. Please, Connie. You want to walk back to town, the other man said. He closed the car door. Charles turned away from the door and then turned back. All right, Connie, he said. This is it. If you let me go this time, you will never see me again. I mean it, Connie. I'm leaving. I'm leaving, the other man said from the car. I mean it, Connie. I really do. Charles started down the steps, talking over his shoulder. Take a last look, he said. I'm going. One word could make me stay. I did not think he was going to go in time. I honestly did not know whether Constance was going to be able to contain herself until he got down the steps and safely into the car. All right, goodbye, Connie, he said from the foot of the steps, and turned away and went slowly toward the car. He looked for a minute, as though he might wipe his eyes or blow his nose, but the other man said, Hurry it up. And Charles looked back once more, raised his hand sadly, and got in the car. Then Constance laughed, and I laughed, and for a minute I saw Charles in the car turn his head quickly, as though he had heard us laughing, but the car had started, and drove off down the driveway, and we held each other in the dark hall and laughed, with tears running down our cheeks and echoes of our laughter going up a ruined stairway to the sky. I'm so happy, Constance said at last, gasping. Merricat, I am so happy. I told you that you would like living on the moon. The Carringtons stopped their car in front of the house one Sunday after church and sat quietly in the car looking at our house, as though supposing that we would come out if there was anything the Carringtons could do for us. Sometimes I thought of the drawing room and the dining room, forever closed away, with our mother's lovely broken things lying scattered, and the dust sifting gently down to cover them. We drew new landmarks in the house, just as we had new pattern for our days. The crooked, broken off fragment, which was all that was left of our lovely stairway, was something we passed every day and came to know as intimately as we had once known the stairs themselves. The boards across the kitchen windows were ours, the part of our house, and we loved them. We were very happy, although Constance was always in terror lest one or two of cups should break, and one of us would have to use a cup without a handle. We had our well-known and familiar places, our chairs at the table, and our beds, and our place beside the front door. Constance washed the red and white tablecloth and the shirts of Uncle Julian's, which she wore, and while they were hanging in the garden to dry, I wore a tablecloth with a yellow border, which looked very handsome with my gold belt. Our mother's old brown shoes were safely put away in my corner of the kitchen, since in the warm summer days I went barefoot like Jonas. Constance disliked picking many flowers, but there was always a bowl on the kitchen table with roses or daisies, although, of course, she never picked a rose from Uncle Julian's rose bush. I sometimes thought of my 6 blue marbles, but I was not allowed to go to the long field now, and I thought that perhaps my 6 blue marbles had been buried to protect a house which no longer existed, and had no connection with the house where we lived now. And we were happy, very happy. My new magical safeguards were the lock on the front door, and the boards over the windows, and the barricades along the sides of the house. In the evening, sometimes, we saw a moment in the darkness on the lawn and heard whispers. Don't let the ladies, don't, the ladies might be watching. You think they can see in the dark? Oh, I heard they see everything that goes on. Then there might be laughter drifting away into the warm darkness. They'll soon be calling this Lover's Lane, Constance said. After Charles, no doubt. At least Charles could have what Charles could have done, Constance said, and considering seriously, was shoot himself through the head in the driveway. We learned from listening to all the strangers could we learned from listening that all the strangers could see from outside when they looked at all was a great ruined structure overgrown with vines, barely recognizable as a house. It was the point halfway between the village and the highway, the middle spot of the path, and no one ever saw our eyes looking out through the vines. You can't go on those steps, the children warned each other. If you do, the ladies will get you. Once a boy dared the others, stood at the front of the steps, facing the house, and shivered, and almost cried, and almost ran away, and then called out shakily, Mary Cat and Constance, would you like a cup of tea? And then fled, followed by all the others. That night we found on the doorsill a basket of fresh eggs and a note reading, He didn't mean to do it. Please. Poor child, Constance said, putting the eggs into a bowl to go into the cooler. He's probably hiding under that bed right now. Perhaps he had a good whipping to teach him manners. We will have an omelet for breakfast. I wonder if I could eat a child if I had a chance. I doubt if I could cook one, said Constance. Poor strangers. They have so much to be afraid of. Well, Constance said, I am afraid of spiders. Jonas and I will see to it that no spider ever comes near you. Oh, Constance, I said, we are so happy. Afterward. Life in Shirley Jackson's Outcastle. 10 and 20 years ago, I used to play a minor parlor trick. I wonder if it would still work. When asked my favorite writer, I would say Shirley Jackson, counting on most of the questionnaires that they had ever heard of her. At that, I'd reply with as much smugness as I could muster, You've read her. When my interlocutor expressed skepticism, I described The Lottery, still most widely anthologized American short story of all time. I had bet, and certainly the most controversial and censored story ever to be, but uh, to ever, to ever, story ever to be to ever debut in the New Yorker. Counting seconds in the inevitable widening of my victim's eyes, they had not only read it, they could never forget it. I'd then happily take credit as a mind reader, though the trick was too easy by far. I don't think it ever failed. Jackson is one of American fiction's impossible presences, too material to be called a phantom in Literature House, too in print to be rediscovered, yet hidden in plain sight. She's both perpetually underrated and persistently mischaracterized as a writer of upscale horror, when in truth, a slim minority of her words had any element of the supernatural. Henry James wrote more ghost stories. While celebrated by reviewers throughout her career, she wasn't welcomed into any canon or school. She's been no major critic's fetish. Sterling in her craft, Jackson is prized by writers who read her, yet it would be self-congratulatory to claim her as a writer's writer. Rather, Shirley Jackson has thrived at publication and since as a reader's writer. Her most famous works, The Lottery and The Haunting of Hill House, are more famous than her name, and have sunk into the cultural memory as timeless artifacts, seeming older than they are, with the resonance of myth of the archetype. The same aura of folkloric familiarity attaches to less celebrated writing, the stories, Charles and The Ordinary Day with the Peanuts. You've read one of these two tales, although you may not know it. And her last novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Anyway, we have that one. What time is it? Oh, goody. So I want to discuss a little bit about, I want to talk a little bit about the, what do we have here? You sound great. Thank you. Hope you're doing well, Richard Lale. Thank you very much. Hello, Magic Girl. I have literally barely no idea what this book is about. It's a good book nonetheless. It's a very good book. So in recap, and then I'll read some Alfred Hitchcock for you. So in recap, this girl in more modern day diagnoses would probably have been seen as having autism and definitely obsessive compulsive disorder, and there was all manner of abuse. And Cousin Charles, it is my thought, Cousin Charles was not in fact Cousin Charles, but rather Cousin Charles was probably their brother. And I say that because Uncle Julian said that you sure look like John. You sure look like John. And then the fact that the mother, not the father, the mother had not allowed any of their father, John Blackwood's name, to be mentioned in their house. So I think perhaps he might be the long lost brother, though that is just speculation, and you can think whatever you like. I, my lovelies, am going to read to you for a couple of stories. These are really short. These are 9 cool stories about haunted houses and ghosts for boys and girls. Now, this is Alfred Hitchcock, of course, and the books are a little bit childish, but they're fun, they're easy to read. And also, I bring this up because Alfred Hitchcock was a big fan of Shirley Jackson. And in fact, The Haunting of Hill House is partially what inspired Psycho. So, good evening, as the case were. And now let's do a little bit of Alfred Hitchcock. Oh, there's a little introduction from Alfred Hitchcock himself. But in order to do that, I have to do a little bit of play acting here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my haunted houseful. Visitors are always welcome. This book is an effort to provide a reading for young people who are at the awkward age. Children who are too lazy to walk but still too young to drive. Here are 9 stories carefully compiled to furnish reading material in life's great waiting room, where we while away the hours until our driver's license is issued. We'll start with Let's Haunt a House. The wooded slope on which a dozen scouts of Troop 15 had pitched their week's camp was naturally cheerful. Sun and sky were bright, and the shade was enough. A spring gurgled, there was firewood at hand, but every camper gazed glumly as Assistant Scoutmaster Brimmer drove off in Junior Scoutmaster Sheenan's car to get the police's help. On the night before, Mr. Brimmer's car had vanished, without explanation or trace. Not even the lightest sleeper had heard an engine start. Nobody could expect the wheel tracks on the rocky downslope from camp, but the softer road below would have shown zigzags to match the distinctive tread of Mr. Brimmer's new tires. And there was nothing but marks of smooth, worn tires. Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Hamilton Holmes, leader of the Hound Patrol, knit in his black brows to denote a sense of duty shirked. Sherlock's nickname, his detective hobby, and the fact that his father was Hillwood's police chief should have been enough. If they weren't, Sherlock had one solved mystery to his credit. Dolefully, he addressed Assistant Patrol Leader Doc Watson. No clues, no noises, no tracks. Ghosts must have gobbled it up. Maybe ghosts did, volunteered Chuck Schaefer. The farmers around here say there's a haunted house 2 miles down the road. Leave it to Mr. Palmer, said Doc Watson. He was plump, but not soft, and spectacles did not hide his bright eyes. He's a police sergeant when he's not our scoutmaster. Mr. Brimmer will bring him back by tonight, and Mr. Palmer will explode all the ghost theories. A new voice broke in. Lean, humorous Max Hinkle strolled over from the pit where he had buried some breakfast garbage. Ghost stories. You sound middle-agey, Sherlock. I'm not middle-aged, Sherlock punned. I was 15 last birthday, and ditto, Doc. I don't believe in ghosts anyway. I don't either, chimed in Doc. I'm just kind of afraid of them. Not me, sniffed Max. Let's just visit the haunted house. The junior scoutmaster had planned the morning's hike and willingly altered the route to follow the road. The scouts found a water-worn trail branching off and explored its rocky length until their leader held up his hand for a halt. No further, he decreed. I don't want any nightmares among you boys tonight. I see the house down there, said Max, peering into a hollow full of tall, gloomy trees. It was a lofty old structure, 2 stories high, with a boarded-up windows and an ancient slate roof. Its paint had weathered and faded to a sorrowful gray. Sherlock, too, gazed, then turned to join the departing hikers. If there were ghosts, they'd live in their regiments, he said. I wouldn't go there after dark, commented Chuck Schaefer. Not for a congressional medal. Medals are for heroes, scoffed Max. I'd go there for nothing, just to prove whatever it would prove. The hike finished and the noon meal eaten, Sherlock brought up the subject again. You'd visit that haunted house after dark, would you, Max? I read you like a book, Sherlock, replied Max. You're daring me to visit Creep Castle after sundown. Medals are for heroes, Sherlock quoted Max's own words. Listen to this, Doc. If Max will go there, I'll give him an item for his collection of junk, that Mexican War medal I found. It's a deal, said Max. He walked away toward the spring. Doc and Sherlock exchanged grins and winks. You know my methods, Watson, said Sherlock softly. I was going to give him the medal anyway. Now, a healthy scare might stir his blood and make him grow. Doc's habitual grin grew broader. Count me in. Sundown brought gloom to the campsite. Deeper gloom to the road below. At the point where the trail to the haunted house branched off, the deepest gloom of all. Here's where I leave you, Sherlock told Max. He turned his flashlight off and made his voice sound hollow. You'll wait here, demanded Max, a little defiant, to mask the uneasiness he could not wholly shake off. Nope, I promise nothing. Get going. Max moved cautiously over the rough stones. Alone, Sherlock threw off his scout shirt, displaying a lightweight black jersey. From a pocket he produced a burnt cork and liberally coated his face. He hoped that Doc Watson's stealthy 30-second start had been enough time for him to reach the center of the house. Doc would wear a sheet to present Max with a white ghost in front. Sherlock would follow behind as a black one. He hurried his preparations to finish and moved after Max. Silent on his canvas sneakers, separately the two approached the house among the shadowy trees, and unsuspecting Max and the furtive Sherlock mounting the tumble-down porch. Max tugged at the front door. It opened, squeaking and grating like something in a radio horror program. Max peered, then went in. A moment later, Sherlock stole noiselessly after him, sliding along the wall inside. The front room was musty and still. Max moved over the boards that creaked. He stared at the point where one carelessly boarded window gave trifling light next to some stairs. On the stairs stirred and rustled something pallid and shapeless. "Oh!" murmured the white thing and waved draped arms. Max jumped back, but only 2 feet. He cleared his throat. "Come on out of that sheet, Doc Watson," he challenged not very shakily. "Don't you think I know your pudgy outline, even in this light?" "Oh!" moaned the thing again and descended a step. Max's eyes raced wide open. "We are getting a trifle used to the gloom. I know you and your bedding too. I suppose that's your pal Sherlock on the stairs behind you." "No, I'm right here," said Sherlock hollowly at Max's shoulder blades. Max jumped as if somebody had stuck him with a pin. "Then what's on the stairs?" Something towering and black behind the sheeted figure emitted a menacing growl. Max whirled and sprinted out the door, off the porch and across the hollow. Behind him, speedy for all his plumpness, hustled Doc Watson, his sheet flapping behind him like a banner. Neither stopped until they had run the length of the rocky terrain and gained the road. As his feet struck the soft earth, Max stopped so quickly that Doc bumped into him from behind. What's that?" quivered Max, pointing unsteadily at something that flapped. "A shirt on a bush," said Doc. "Sherlock hung it there." "Where's Sherlock?" demanded Max, staring along the way he had come. "I heard him inside the house." But neither of them heard him now. Sherlock still stood against the wall of the old room, not 5 feet from the door. The abrupt flight of Max, with Doc at his heels, had delayed Sherlock's own retreat, and the doorway was now blocked by the huge dark shape that had followed Doc downstairs. It stood long and motionlessly, uttering no sound beyond heavy breathing. Then it turned heavily and faced the interior. Lingering on the threshold, Sherlock held his own breath, glad of the dark jersey and burnt cork that he had donned to frighten Max. Now they helped him blend into the darkness. "Well?" came a harsh, high voice from upstairs, making Sherlock's curls crawl with shocked terror. "What was that?" and replied in a voice as deep as a bullfrog's. "Can't be sure, Corey. You were in the attic, huh?" "I was just opening a can of hash in the upstairs back room and I heard feet down here on the stairs. I started down as quiet as I could and somebody else came in. They talked together, sounded like kids. Then one of them saw me and they went out here like dogs with cans tied to them." "Did you see him playing outside?" demanded the high voice. "For a second. They dusted away under the trees faster than my eyes could follow, let alone me. They sounded like kids." "But maybe they weren't, Corey," finished the high voice. The footsteps that came downstairs sounded light and active, like a small, spry man. "You were smart not to go after him. Somebody might have had a gun." "Strike a light," said the big fellow, called Corey, and Sherlock felt his tongue grow dry between his teeth. But the other man made an ugly noise of scornful refusal. "Won't you ever learn, Corey? Anybody watching could see that light between the boards and the windows. We stay dark in here after sundown, like I told you when we first came. The hicks round here give the place plenty of leeway, with all the ghost stories about it, but lights might bring dicks instead of hicks." Corey came back inside and pulled the door shut. He turned. Sherlock thought Corey was coming his way and retreated along the wall as silently as he could. But there was a creak as a heavy weight settled on the old chair. "Come on down, Stubbs," Corey urged his companion. "Let's listen for a while before we turn in." Stubbs descended the stairs and sat at the bottom step. Sherlock saw him dimly in the feeble light that hung there. He was as short as his name, but built for action, with wide shoulders and narrow hips, and a head carried alert upright. Something clinked. Stubbs had laid a metal object on a step beside him. A gun? "It's going to be lonesome here," complained Corey. "3 days and nights in this spook hole, and I feel spooky myself." "Good," Stubbs rejoined. "The local yokels expect spooks. Maybe what you're doing has its drawbacks, but it's better than working, isn't it?" "And you can't beat the hours," said Corey, his good humor a little restored. "We ain't done bad so far. We got one night before last, another last night, and you say you spotted another we can get tomorrow night. Pull them into pieces, and 88 garages hungry for parts will push and scramble to pay our prices." Sherlock had continued to move along the wall, silent on sneaker-clad feet, as he had learned to do in many night game. He hugged the wall so that the floorboards would not creak. A gust of cool air fanned his cork-smeared cheek, and he put out a hand and found the edge of an open door. Corey and Stubbs chattered on, and he crouched down to the back of the doorway into the next room. For an instant of horror, he feared there was no next room. His backward groping foot could not find the floor to stand on, and only a quick noise. A quick, noiseless grab for the door jamb kept him from falling. Then his foot stretched lower and touched solid wood. Another stairway here, going down. Sherlock painfully descended another stairway. Another step, and another, and another. He groped around to turn in the stairs to a door below tightly closed. For a long minute he waited, hand on latch, until Stubbs said something in his harsh, high voice that set both men laughing in the room above. Under cover of the whoops, Sherlock lifted the latch, slipped through, and closed the door behind him. It was darker here than upstairs. He knelt and touched a cement floor, then a cement wall. Sniffing, he detected an oily smell. Upstairs, Corey and Stubbs discussed something, but he could not make out their words. From his pocket, he drew a flashlight, paused to gather all his powers of attention. Then he flashed it on, held it for 2 seconds, and flashed it off again. He had seen a big rectangular chamber with double doors at the end. These must lead to an entry from the lower ground behind the house. The basement itself was furnished with a long bench of dark wood along one wall with boxes upon it, and larger crates and kegs underneath it. Near the double doors was a jumble of big, irregular shapes covered with old blankets and tarpaulins. Sherlock tiptoed gingerly toward where he had seen the bench. He pawed for and found its corner. Next, he groped into a box, and he lifted out something that felt like an ornamental cap for the radiator of an automobile. Returning it, he felt other things in the box. Spark plugs, he decided. Another box held more small parts for an automobile. No, much more than enough for one car. What had Stubbs said? A job that's better than working. The men had mentioned garages. Was this a garage? Why run a garage here? And why hide it if they were running it? Feeling his way along the bench, he touched something with his toe and stopped to investigate. A cylinder head, he guessed, and beside it 3 more. Beyond came upon an axle rods leaning against the wall beyond the bench, and, afraid of knocking them down, he gave them wide berth and continued on the double doors. But he found that they were padlocked shut, and turned back to the bulks swathed in blankets and tarpaulins. Perhaps he could hide among them until morning, then find his way upstairs and out. The nearest tarpaulin covered a heap of fenders. No dents or breaks. They were certainly not in for repair. Next, he uncovered a stack of tires, still on their rims. He prodded the uppermost tires. He remembered the mystery of the morning. His fingers quested along the tread of one, then another. The pattern was sharp, cut, new, and recognizable. He and the other scouts had searched for its marks short hours ago. The rear tires of Mr. Brimmer's vanished car had been patterned in just that zigzag fashion. Now I know. He opened his mouth to say it aloud, and stopped just in time. He almost knew, really, but very shortly he would make sure. He lifted off the two zigzag tread tires, then two more that must have shod Mr. Brinner's front wheels. The tires below were worn smooth, like the tires that had made the marks on the road, marks disregarded by himself and others. He lifted one and found it strangely heavy and still contained a complete wheel. I do know. And when the knowledge drove into his mind, perhaps he could be excused for dropping the wheel and knocking over the whole stack of tires with a heavy echoing thump. Instantly, the voices upstairs fell silent. He heard Stubbs and Corey get to their feet. He heard the floor creak as they moved cautiously but purposefully toward the basement stairs, the heavy feet of Corey and the sure light feet of Stubbs. Caught Sherlock, told himself wretchedly. There were only two ways out of the basement, one padlocked, the other being descended by the men who were after him. He must think of something brilliant and decisive, something that would give him the right to nickname of Sherlock, or inside of a brief seconds. Sherlock, of course. It was in Sherlock Holmes, not in the stories, but in the play. He himself had never seen William Gillette as the great detective, but his father had often told him about it. The big scene especially lived in his imagination. A dark room, murderous villains, and how Sherlock Holmes had misdirected their attack. He snapped on his flashlight, ran to the bench, and set it there, so that its beam made a halo of radiance at the door. Light must have seeped at once through the cracks for the men halfway downstairs paused. Guns, Corey, Sherlock heard Stubbs say, his heart racing, his lip caught in his teeth. Sherlock tiptoed to the door and stood next to its hinges. A hand rattled the latch, lifted it. The door was thrown open, screening him from the rest of the cellar. There he is, Stubbs yelled furiously. Slap him full of lead. Revolver shots rang in the cellar like a bombardment. Both Stubbs and Corey were snarling and shouting as they charged the light after their volley. As they cleared the door, Sherlock spun into it and darted up the stairs. He tripped on the top one, but he kept his feet. Spun into it and darted up the stairs. He tripped on the top one, but kept his feet. From 4 mighty leaps carried him to the front door. He wrenched it open and ran as Max and Doc had done, making for the trail that led to the road. Racing along the stony path, he strained his eyes to see ahead. Almost as the road he came to a halt. A car was parked squarely across the head of the trail. The figures moved stealthily toward him, allies of Corey and Stubbs. He tried to turn and flee back the way he had come, that bumped into a tree, and cried out despite himself. That you, Sherlock? Called Doc Watson. Take it easy, said someone else. It was Sergeant Palmer, his scoutmaster, pushing close with a grim expression of his normally pleasant face. Others gathered round Sherlock, Max, Doc, Mr. Brimmer, and the broad-bodied stranger who wore the star that identified the township constable. We made it to camp in about 8 jumps, Doc told Sherlock pantingly. Mr. Brimmer was back with Sergeant Palmer, and he and the constable drove down here to find out. 1 second. It's all solved, Sherlock cut in hurriedly. I have been down in the cellar of the place. There are 2 men stealing cars. I found parts of Mr. Brinner's car, and 2 or 3 others. They're stripping the stolen cars for parts, tires, and so on, and are selling them second-hand. That's why, said Mr. Brimmer. But how'd they get my car away without our hearing it or finding tire marks? I found out too, said Sherlock. Stacked with your tires were other smooth, worn old tires, with your wheels still inside them. That explains it. They sneaked up and switched those tires so we couldn't see the tread patterns we knew. And they could roll the car downhill without starting the motor. Sergeant Palmer was moving along the trail again. Careful, Sherlock called softly. They have guns. They shot at me. That is, they shot at where I made them think I was. You've given us enough information, Sherlock, Sergeant Palmer told him. Keep quiet, and you and the others stay at the rear. Constable, you and I will go up the trail on either side. He slid in among the trees up to the right, the constable to the left, and both stole in the direction of the house. They had not gone a score of paces before the sound of feet, a pair of heavy feet, another pair of light ones, came toward them from the hollow. Sergeant Palmer paused behind the trunk that would turn any bullet and drew his police revolver. His other hand flashed a light along the trail, and in its glow, two figures stopped and made as if to run. Stop, you're under arrest, snapped the sergeant quickly. Drop those guns and hold up your hands. There were two clinks on the stones, and the men glumly lifted their arms. Yeah, all right, you win, squealed Stubbs angrily. You got us surrounded. The constable and Sergeant Palmer closed in, quickly snatching up two fallen revolvers. The others came up to watch. Sherlock had a good look at his enemy's face for the first time. Surrounded? Palmer took the time to repeat. Sure, back at the house. How'd your pal slip into the house, into the basement? We shot his flashlight full of holes, but we didn't get him. If he's coming up behind us, yell out, we've quit. I don't want no slugs in my back. The constable had brought a pair of handcuffs, and now he shackled Corey's right wrist to Stubbs' left. Sergeant Palmer slid the revolver back into its holster and chuckled. I only know half the story so far, he told the prisoners. But we didn't have anybody there, no other peace officers at least. This boy. I don't know why that's going. And he clapped Sherlock on the shoulder. Was the one who found out what you were up to and scared you into thinking you were surrounded. Corey and Stubbs glared at Sherlock. Corey moistened his lips. Good night, boys. Good night, Boy Scouts, he grumbled. What's your name, kid? Just call him Sherlock, piped up Doc Watson. So next week, my lovelies, I'm going to start a different book. I don't know exactly what I'm going to read yet, but I'm going to read something else. Hello, Matthew. Good to see you. Thank you, Bumblebee. That was very nice of you to say. Literally barely no idea. Oh, yes. The printer is here, and it seems to be going off, and it did startle me somewhat, and I lost the end of my cuff link, which I must find. Anyway, my lovelies, thank you for joining me on this Saturday night. Next week, we should be doing another Scared and Alone on Saturday, so I hope to see you there. And till next time, till next Friday when we begin to read. All right, lovelies, have a good evening. Take care.